Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, March 10, 2026. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt says the recent increase in oil and gas prices is temporary, and the prices will drop rapidly once the objectives of the U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran are achieved. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, says after a classified briefing on the war in Iran that the Trump administration is on a path towards putting U.S. troops on the ground. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, in a morning briefing, says today will be the most intense day of strikes in the war. Also, the Senate confirms U.S. Army Lieutenant General Joshua Rudd to lead the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, asked about President Donald Trump's demand to make passage of a mandatory voter ID bill the top priority. And Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, unveils a proposal to overhaul the delivery of programs like Medicaid, which have been the subject of federal fraud investigations. That and a lot more coming up on Washington Today. CNBC writing that drivers are seeing the highest gas prices in more than a year and a half as the U.S.-Iran war disrupts the global oil trade. The average price per gallon of unleaded gas in the U.S. climbed to about $3.54 per gallon on Tuesday, according to AAA. It's the highest level seen since mid-2024 and marks a 21% increase from a month ago, reporting from CNBC. The White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt opened her news conference at the White House, talking about the war and the price of energy.
President Trump will not allow rogue Iranian terrorists to stop the freedom of navigation and the free flow of energy. Let me be clear. It is a good thing to wipe out terrorists who indiscriminately target civilians and attempt to hold the global economy hostage. And President Trump should be commended for doing so. As the president made unequivocally clear to the remaining elements of this terrorist regime in his statement yesterday, if they do anything to stop the flow of oil or goods within the Strait of Hormuz, they will be hit by the world's most powerful military 20 times harder than they have been hit thus far. Moving forward, the stated objectives for Operation Epic Fury remain the same. Destroy the terrorist regime's ballistic missiles, raise their Iranian missile industry to the ground, ensure their terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region, and ensure that Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon. President Trump remains confident these goals will be accomplished in swift fashion. As for the oil, President Trump fully expected the rogue Iranian regime to try and disrupt the global markets. That's why President Trump and his energy team have been planning for this long before the strike and have moved quickly to address these temporary disruptions. Thus far, the Trump administration has offered political risk insurance to tankers operating in the Gulf. The Treasury temporarily waived certain oil-related sanctions, and the commander-in-chief has offered the U.S. Navy to escort tankers when necessary. The president and his energy team are closely watching the markets, speaking with industry leaders, and the U.S. military is drawing up additional options following the president's directive to continue keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. I will not broadcast what those options look like, but just know the president is not afraid to use them. Rest assured to the American people, the recent increase in oil and gas prices is temporary, and this operation will result in lower gas prices in the long term. Once the national security objectives of Operation Epic Fury are fully achieved, Americans will see oil and gas prices drop rapidly, potentially even lower than they were prior to the start of the operation. And we will live in a world where Iran can no longer threaten the United States or our allies with a nuclear bomb.
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt opening up her news conference at the White House. Energy Secretary Christopher Wright posted today, then deleted a claim that the United States military provided protection for an oil tanker traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. And Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt was asked about it.
Can you explain why the Energy Secretary posted and then appeared to have deleted a post on X saying that the U.S. Navy escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz?
Yes, I was made aware of this post. I haven't had a chance to talk to the Energy Secretary about it directly. However, I know the post was taken down pretty quickly, and I can confirm that the U.S. Navy has not escorted a tanker or a vessel at this time, though, of course, that's an option the president has said he will absolutely utilize if and when necessary at the appropriate time.
And if this was something that was posted erroneously, could it be because of a staffer? Or what, I guess, will there be any consequences for this? I know you still have to consult, but just generally speaking.
Again, I would defer you to the Department of Energy to answer that question.
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt in the White House briefing room. Wall Street today, the Dow down 34, NASDAQ up 1, S&P down 14. On Capitol Hill, senators on the Armed Services Committee received another classified briefing from the Trump administration about U.S. military operations against Iran. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, came out and told reporters the briefing left him dissatisfied and angry.
I emerged from this briefing as dissatisfied and angry, frankly, as I have from any past briefing in my 15 years in the Senate. I am left with more questions than answers, especially about the cost of the war. My questions have been unanswered, and I will demand answers because the American people deserve to know. And I guess I am most concerned about the threat to American lives of potentially deploying our sons and daughters on the ground in Iran. We seem to be on a path toward deploying American troops on the ground in Iran to accomplish any of the potential objectives here. And there is also, as disturbingly as anything else, the specter of active Russian aid to Iran, putting in danger American lives. Literally, Russia seems to be aiding our enemy actively and intensively with intelligence and perhaps with other means. And China also may be assisting Iran. So the American people deserve to know much more than this administration has told them about the cost of the war, the danger to our sons and daughters in uniform, and the potential for further escalation and widening of this war, a war of choice made by this president, not chosen by the American people, with potentially huge consequences to American lives.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, speaking to reporters outside the classified briefing on the war in Iran for members of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Members of the Trump administration questioned about those 2 points that the senator mentioned. First, about the chances of U.S. troops on the ground in Iran, and the second about Russia helping Iran with intelligence to target U.S. military assets in the Middle East. Here's the press secretary at the White House, Karoline Leavitt, on the first point.
There was a briefing on the Capitol Hill today, and some senators came out and said they were more convinced than ever that there would be U.S. boots on the ground. Senator Blumenthal said that, in fact. Your reaction to that, and any update on President Trump's thinking about it?
Look, I would say that Democrats on Capitol Hill are clearly being quite disingenuous. 3 years ago, not a single Democrat voted against the resolution condemning Iran as the world's leading state sponsor of terror. Yet now, with President Trump as commander-in-chief finally taking the action that so many Democrats have called on the commander-in-chief to do for many, many years, to wipe out the threat of a rogue Iranian terrorist regime, now all of a sudden Democrats are playing politics with this long-standing bipartisan policy of the United States, and 53 of them in the House recently voted against the resolution condemning Iran as the world's state sponsor of terror. So I wouldn't take Democrats at their word. As for boots on the ground, the president has talked about this repeatedly. Wisely, he does not rule options out as commander-in-chief. So again, I would hesitate to confirm anything that a Democrat on Capitol Hill says right now about the president's thinking.
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Steve Witkoff, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, told CNBC today that Russian President Vladimir Putin told President Donald Trump in a phone call Monday that Russia is not providing intelligence to Iran to target U.S. positions.
Yesterday on the call with the president, the Russians said that they have not been sharing. That's what they said. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we can take them at their word, but they did say that. And yesterday morning, independently, Jared and I had a call with Ushakov, who reiterated the same. So that's a better question for the intel people, but let's hope that they're not sharing.
Steve Witkoff, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, today on CNBC. From the Hill, a group of Senate Democrats are threatening to use every procedural tool at their disposal to hold up business on the Senate floor unless Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and other senior officials testify before key committees under oath on the military conflict with Iran. Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, said Monday evening, "We have collectively agreed that we're going to use the levers that we have. We should be having hearings on the biggest military engagement since the war in Afghanistan." Reporting from the Hill, Senator Booker was on MS Now today talking about this.
What do you hope to hear? What do you hope to get in an open hearing to have Secretary Rubio or Defense Secretary Hegseth sitting before you?
You know, what we're demanding is what the American people want. Like, you have people sitting at home watching this president drive up their health care costs, drive up their fuel costs, cut their student lunch programs for their kids, cut the VA benefits for people who've been to war and come home, all while now he's expending billions and billions of dollars on this unilateral decision to go to war. And they're saying, hey, where's my Congress? You're supposed to provide a check and a balance. You're supposed to provide oversight. You're supposed to provide investigation. Damn, you're the most deliberative body and you're not even deliberating over this war. That's unacceptable. And so what we hope to do is bring these leaders before Congress and provide that oversight that is urgent right now when Americans are paying the ultimate sacrifice for Donald Trump's war. And let me say one last thing. I don't think this is defensible. You all are talking about it almost in a comical way, that they cannot show what the provocation was specifically, nor have they been able to state an end state.
Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, today on MS Now. There's an article on the MS Now website that reads, a majority of Americans, 57%, are opposed to how President Trump is handling the war with Iran, according to the latest Quinnipiac University poll. The survey showed 83% of Republicans approve of the military operation, compared with 5% of Democrats. And that was from MS Now. This is Washington Today. Reuters writing, the United States and Israel pounded Iran on Tuesday with what the Pentagon and Iranians on the ground said were the most intense airstrikes of the war, despite global markets betting that President Donald Trump will seek an end to the conflict soon, raising the stakes for the global economy. Iran's Revolutionary Guard said they would block oil shipments from the Gulf unless U.S. and Israeli attacks cease. That was from Reuters. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth spoke at an early morning news conference at the Pentagon.
We will not relent until the enemy is totally and decisively defeated. But we do so. We do so on our timeline and at our choosing. For example, today will be yet again our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes. Intelligence more refined and better than ever. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, the last 24 hours have seen Iran fire the lowest number of missiles they've been capable of firing yet. Just the bifurcation, just the trend lines that we talked about on our first briefing. You see, this is not 2003. This is not endless nation building under those types of quagmires we saw under Bush or Obama. It's not even close. Our generation of soldier will not let that happen again, and nor will this president, who very clearly ran against those kinds of never-ending, nebulously scoped missions. Those days are dead. Instead, we're winning decisively with brutal efficiency, total air dominance, and an unbreakable will to accomplish the president's objectives on our timeline. We stay locked on the target, because here at the Department of War, that's our job. Now, the chairman and I, having just returned from Dover last night, our troops and their families and the enormous sacrifice that they make is certainly heavy on my mind. So I'll close with scripture, drawing strength from Psalm 144. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. He is my loving God and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer, my shield in whom I take refuge.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at a Pentagon news conference. Washington Post writing the Pentagon burned through $5.6 billion worth of munitions during the first 2 days of its military assault on Iran, according to 3 U.S. officials, a figure that underscores the deepening alarm among some on Capitol Hill over the speed at which U.S. forces have eaten into the scarce supply of America's most advanced weaponry. Trump administration also is expected to send Congress a supplemental defense budget request as soon as this week, potentially totaling tens of billions of dollars to help sustain its campaign, officials said. And that was from the Washington Post. At today's Pentagon news conference, joining the secretary was General Dan Kane, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A reporter asked about the estimated timeline for the war and Iranian military capabilities.
Mr. Secretary, Eric Schmidt with the New York Times. A question for you first. Last week, you talked about this being the beginnings of an air campaign that could last 3 to 8 weeks. Can you give us your assessment on where we are now? And Mr. Chairman, in any conflict, the enemy or the adversary adapts to the tactics it faces. Can you talk about the most challenging adaptation the Iranian military has made to the U.S. military? What challenges are you facing most right now? Thank you.
I appreciate the question. Where we are is in a very strong place, giving the President of the United States maximum options. And from the beginning, from this podium, we haven't stated how long it will take. Our will is endless. Ultimately, the President gets to determine the end state of those objectives, right? But what he's said continually, and I want the American people to understand, is this is not endless. It's not protracted. We're not allowing mission creep. The President has set a very specific mission to accomplish. And our job is to unrelentingly deliver that. Now, he gets to control the throttle. He's the one deciding, he's the one elected on behalf of the American people when we're achieving those particular objectives. And so it's not for me to posit whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end. That's his, and he'll continue to communicate that. What we serve him as is we give him updates on a daily basis of exactly where we are so he can make that determination on the throttle. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the question on adaptation. As you're right, no plan survives first contact with the enemy or Murphy. They're adapting, as are we. Of course, we have very entrepreneurial warfighters out there. I'd rather not, for operational security reasons, tell them what's working. So I'm not a not answer that question based on that. But we are watching what they're doing, and we are adapting faster than they are.
Are they more formidable than you anticipated, General?
I think they're fighting, and I respect that, but I don't think they're more formidable than what we thought.
General Dan Kane, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, along with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at a Pentagon news conference. Associated Press reporting about Iranian leaders' posts. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf said on X that Iran was definitely not looking for a ceasefire. He said, "We believe that the aggressor should be punched in the mouth so that he learns a lesson so that he will never think of attacking our beloved Iran again." Another top Iranian security official, Ali Larijani, appeared to threaten U.S. President Donald Trump himself, writing on X that Iran doesn't fear your empty threats. Even those bigger than you couldn't eliminate Iran. Be careful not to get eliminated yourself. Reporting from Associated Press. And Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Amir Saeed Iravani, spoke at the UN in New York City today.
I wish to provide another brief update on the deliberate, unprovoked, and unlawful war of aggression launched by the United States and the Israeli regime against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Today is the 11th consecutive day of this brutal war against the people of Iran, which began on 28 February. During this time, the United States and Israeli regime continue their massive attack against Iran and the Iranian people without pause, day and night. They are deliberately and discriminately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure across my country. They show no respect for international law and no restraint in committing these crimes. Densely populated residential area and critical civilian infrastructure are deliberately targeted. So far, these horrific crimes have resulted in the martyrdom of more than 1,300 civilians. They have also destroyed 9,669 civilian sites, including 7,943 residential homes, 1,617 commercial and service centers, 32 medical and pharmaceutical facilities, 65 schools and educational institutions, 13 Red Cross buildings, and several energy supply facilities. These figures continue to rise every day as the United States and Israel carry out continuous military attacks and war crimes across cities throughout Iran.
The Iranian ambassador to the United Nations, Amir Saeed Iravani, start of his statement today at the UN in New York City. He did not take any reporters' questions. Associated Press writing, the State Department said in a statement on Tuesday that it has organized more than 24 charter flights that have carried thousands of U.S. citizens from various Mideast countries to either the United States or Europe, but that most of the more than 27,000 who have sought help, quote, have declined assistance when offered, opting either to remain in country or book more convenient commercial flight options. That was from AP. From Reuters, Canada is increasing security around U.S. and Israeli diplomatic buildings after a shooting at the U.S. consulate in Toronto, a Canadian police official said on Tuesday. That official, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Chief Superintendent Chris Leather, who spoke to reporters.
At this stage, I can confirm that the RCMP is working closely with the Toronto Police Service and our international partners who will assist us in a fulsome investigation into the shooting that took place overnight, early this morning, at the American consulate behind us. The RCMP's Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, INSET, GTA, has permanent positions for members of the Toronto Police Service, which further increase our capacity to conduct these investigations in real time with established and strong relationships, intelligence sharing, and tactics. At this time, the INSET team has been engaged, as this is a national security incident, and we are working with Toronto Police and others to understand the motivations of those involved. The RCMP regularly works in close collaboration with police services of jurisdictions across the country, as well as our partners with Global Affairs Canada, in the fulfillment of our mandate to provide protection of designated persons, including foreign diplomats, and in relation to incidents that occur at or in the vicinity of embassies or consulates.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police Chief Superintendent Chris Leather at the U.S. Consulate in Toronto. Ontario Premier Doug Ford putting out a statement. The shooting that took place at the U.S. Consulate early this morning is an absolutely unacceptable act of violence and intimidation aimed at our American friends and neighbors. Everyone at all levels of government and across Canada needs to make clear that there is zero tolerance for this sort of intimidating and dangerous behavior. Story from NBC News. A Republican congressman from Tennessee declared on social media Monday that, quote, Muslims don't belong in American society, prompting backlash largely from Democrats. Pluralism is a lie, Congressman Andy Ogles continued in the bigoted post on X. Democratic politicians swiftly condemned Ogles and his post, with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York calling Ogles a malignant clown. Jeffries wrote on X, disgusting Islamophobes like you do not belong in Congress or in civilized society. This is all from the NBC News article. It continues, the post came after an attempted terrorist attack in New York City, where federal prosecutors have said the two suspects are aligned with ISIS, a common name for the Islamic State terrorist group. Again, that was from NBC News. U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, was asked about Congressman Ogles' post at a news conference at the House Republican Retreat in Doral, Florida.
Look, I've spoken to those members and all members, as I always do, about our tone and our message and what we say. There's a lot of energy in the country and a lot of popular sentiment that the demand to impose Sharia law in America is a serious problem. That's what animates this, and that's the the language that people use. It's different language than I would use, but I think that that's a serious issue. Sharia law and the imposition of Sharia law is contrary to the U.S. Constitution. Our Constitution is the greatest in the world. It's the longest surviving Constitution on the planet, And we're 250 years into this grand experiment in self-governance. And one of the principles that we believe in, stated first in the nation's birth certificate, is that all of us are created equal by God. It means every single person has inestimable dignity and value, and that we respect everyone's beliefs and their right to live out their beliefs and to speak freely about their beliefs and have that conviction. But when you seek to come to a country and not assimilate, but to impose Sharia law is in conflict with the U.S. Constitution. That is the conflict that people are talking about. It is not about people as Muslims. It's about those who seek to impose a different belief system that is in direct conflict with the Constitution. That's where I think that comes from.
U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference today at the Trump-Doral Golf Club in Florida, where the House Republicans are holding their annual policy retreat. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, a Democrat, was asked by a reporter today about protests this past weekend outside Gracie Mansion, the mayor's home, led by a right-wing influencer, Jake Lang, to, as Lang put it, end the Islamification of New York City. Mamdani is Muslim.
Mr. Mayor, during the campaign, you spoke movingly about the pain you felt about getting death threats because of your religion. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if, when you had these demonstrators on the steps of where you now live, if you feel that same pain and if you've been getting death threats and other things that really are inappropriate for somebody in your position. And can you talk about what it personally means to you?
I first just want to say that I'm deeply thankful to the men and women of the NYPD, many of whom are on my security detail, and ensure that I am safe, that my wife is safe, that we do not have to worry about our ability to go about our days. I do not have to worry about my ability to carry out the responsibility that I have to New Yorkers. And I'll say, Marsha, the thing that affects me more is not language that people use to describe me, but that it's language that they use to describe so many who call this city home. And even as in that protest, there is a vision of a city that does not leave room for more than 1 million Muslims who call this city their home, and it is a vision that I abhor, I also still do believe that those protesters have a right to protest. And that is part of what it means to be able to stand up for the laws of the city as well as the Constitution of our country.
New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, a Democrat, today in New York City. This is Washington Today. National Review writing that Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, called out right-wing influencers for peddling anti-Jewish sentiment on Tuesday while speaking at a symposium on anti-Semitism hosted by National Review and the Republican Jewish Coalition. Cotton mockingly used air quotes to dismiss the influencers on the right and separated them from the conservative movement he is part of. He compared the economic policy of those influencers with progressive Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, and their foreign policy to that of Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat of Michigan, an outspoken opponent of Israel and the Trump administration. That was the article from National Review. Here is Senator Cotton. The anti-Semitism symposium was held in Washington at the Museum of the Bible.
I know many of you are also concerned, though, about a seeming rise of anti-Semitism among influencers on the erstwhile right. Now, I use sarcastic air quotes for a reason. First off, these influencers are perceived to be on the right. And maybe they once were, maybe they once wrote for center-right magazines, maybe they once worked for center-right websites or media companies. But I do not agree that I share a political movement or a political party with anyone who traffics in anti-Semitism. And for that matter, doesn't just traffic in anti-Semitism, or at least adjacent to anti-Semitism, shares Liz Warren's economic policies. Or Rashida Tlaib's foreign policy. Because if you noticed, these so-called influencers, like anti-Semites usually do, often have a deep antipathy to free market capitalism. Whatever their views once were, they have since adopted, indeed, Liz Warren's economic policies. They also, as I said, share Rashida Tlaib's foreign policy, which could be summed up as Jeane Kirkpatrick once said, blame America first. They always blame America first, if they're not blaming Israel first. It's a close competition. I also used ironic, sarcastic air quotes about the term influencer. That is a fake, made-up, phony word. Didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. Go look at definition. Go look at a dictionary. See if that word was present in that dictionary 5 or 10 years ago. It wasn't. So the question is, why did people have to make up the word influencer? And I think the answer is the time-tested, old-fashioned, sturdy word influential does not apply to them. They are not influential. They are at least not influential with Donald Trump, who continues to reject their kooky advice. They are not influential with Republicans in the Senate, who continue to reject their kooky advice. And if you look at public opinion polls, they are least influential of all with normal voting Republicans all across the country.
Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, chair of the Intelligence Committee, at an anti-Semitism symposium in Washington co-hosted by the National Review and the Republican Jewish Coalition. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hello, political junkies. Searching for new and original political stories without political bias? Well, search no more, because, wow, does C-SPAN have just the place for you? The new Extreme Wortman podcast. Every week, hear compelling clips straight from the C-SPAN archives. Iconic, obscure, and everything in between. Inspired by real-life events happening right now. Find Extreme Wortman wherever you get podcasts.
Support for C-SPAN Radio comes from YouTube.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Axios writing, the Senate overwhelmingly confirmed Army Lieutenant General Joshua Rudd, the Deputy Chief of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, as the Director of the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command. Rudd, who some lawmakers have criticized for a lack of military cyber experience, is the first permanent director of the dual-hat role since President Trump fired Air Force General Timothy Hawk nearly a year ago. Senators voted 71-29 to confirm Rudd, who Trump picked as his nominee in December after passing up on 2 other choices. That was the article from Axios. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, spoke on the Senate floor before the vote against the nominee.
During his hearing, General Rudd failed to demonstrate a bare minimum understanding of the constitutional limits on NSA activities. His responses to questions about privacy rights and transparency were deeply troubling. He wouldn't commit to the agency's past policy of not purchasing and using very sensitive location data on Americans. And he wouldn't rule out secretly violating public policies and guardrails on NSA activities. While I admire the nominee's many years of military service, he does not have a background in national signals intelligence activities or cyber operations that would qualify him for this position. Now, he's not the first unqualified nominee. In fact, there are currently no qualified Senate-confirmed officials in charge of cybersecurity. The country faces serious cybersecurity threats. This is truly a 5-alarm fire. Yet the president keeps nominating officials to key cybersecurity roles who have less knowledge of the topic than an undergraduate computer science major. General Rudd is the wrong person for the job, and I oppose his nomination.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, today on the Senate floor. Senator Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, the Armed Services Committee chair, spoke Monday on the Senate floor on this nomination before a preliminary procedural vote.
General Rudd was reported out of the Armed Services Committee by a voice vote. No one even asked for a roll call vote. So there is strong bipartisan support, even among people who agree with my colleague about the wisdom of the president's action. Even among those people, they agree by a voice vote that General Rudd should be appointed. Operation Epic Fury is complex. It's demanding, and the president is going to dismantle the terrorist regime in Iran, and our capabilities in the cyber domain in that regard have never been more important. So we need this gentleman in office. We'll never get unanimity on every issue, but there's huge support on this side of the aisle and on the Democratic side of the aisle.
Senator Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, on the Senate floor on Monday. Today, the Senate confirmed Lieutenant General Joshua Rudd, Deputy Chief of Staff of Indo-Pacific Command, as Director of the NSA, National Security Agency, and U.S. Cyber Command. The vote was 71-29, 17 Democrats joining Republicans in voting yes. NextGov.com reports that as Director, he'll be the face of some of the nation's most secretive electronic spying activities. In April, a powerful foreign policy tool used often by NSA, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, will expire unless renewed by lawmakers. And the upcoming midterm elections are also top of mind for observers of the intelligence agency and Digital Combatant Command. That was from nextgov.com. Airports across the country, writes the National News Desk, are asking travelers to arrive early and spend hours waiting in line at security checkpoints, with the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security ramping up a shortage of workers. Funding for DHS, which oversees the Transportation Security Administration and other agencies, expired in mid-February, with Republicans and Democrats locked into a standoff on funding for federal immigration reform. TSA's roughly 50,000 workers received a partial paycheck on February 28th and will miss their first full paycheck this week. That was from the National News Desk. Senator Katie Britt, Republican of Alabama, chair of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, joined today's Senate Republican Leadership News Conference in the Capitol building.
It's a disappointing day. We are 39 days past when we decided we would do a 2-week CR, which we gave the Democrats in good faith to be able to have a conversation about the proper way to fund the Department of Homeland Security moving forward. We are now 25 days into a government shutdown with a department that is actually charged with keeping Americans safe. We have seen what's happening across our country. We also know that there is the ability to have increased threats. And the agency, whether it be Coast Guard, TSA, CISA, Secret Service, CBP, and ICE, have gone unfunded. This is reckless, and it's disingenuous. Here they are telling you they want to see reforms. But I am here to tell you that they have not come to the table. Despite countless offers to sit down and try to find a pathway forward, they will not even have a conversation with us. So you are 39 days past when we decided this pathway forward and agreed to them to work on this, and they have not sat down one time. Folks, that means that this is all about politics. It was never about people. We stand here ready to put the safety of Americans in front of that, and I would hope our Democratic colleagues would do the same. But at the very least, they must answer for that. Not being willing to have a conversation, not being willing to figure out a pathway forward. We certainly are. We stand ready to do that. We stand ready to do what's right for the American people.
Senator Katie Britt, Republican from Alabama, at today's Senate Republican Leadership News Conference in the U.S. Capitol building. The Senate Democratic leaders held a news conference in the same spot, shortly thereafter. And the Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, was asked about what Senator Britt just said. He responded, "That's a lot of bull. The White House will not budge on things that Americans want," in relation to funding the department and reform of federal immigration procedures. Joining Senator Schumer was Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat from Hawaii.
One of the things that surprised me on Monday was the number of Senate Republicans that were not aware that we went to the floor and said, why don't we narrow the scope of our disagreement all the way down to the one agency that we're fighting about? What is the reason for holding TSA hostage? What is the reason for defunding the Coast Guard? What is the reason for defunding FEMA or CISA? And so we went to the floor and said, we are in a deep disagreement, but an ongoing negotiation about ICE and CBP. And so let's narrow it to just that and fund the rest of the government. And it was blocked by Senate Republicans. And so if they would like to open any of these agencies, they should walk onto the floor and offer unanimous consent to open the Coast Guard, to open TSA, to fund FEMA, to fund CISA, and I guarantee you there will not be a Democratic objector. It is the Republicans that are blocking the reopening of these critical agencies. It is true that we are still far apart on the question of ICE. It is also true that there is no reason at all to hold TSA or the Coast Guard or FEMA hostage while our negotiations continue.
Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat from Hawaii. Story from the Hill. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, on Tuesday bluntly rejected President Trump's call to pass the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or SAVE Act, by forcing Democrats to deploy a talking filibuster to oppose it, stating the votes aren't there for a talking filibuster. Thune poured water on the proposal to make it tougher for Democrats to block the legislation, which would require people to show documented proof of citizenship to register to vote by requiring them to actively hold the Senate floor in debate. The GOP leader made his comments after President Trump told Republicans at an issues conference in Doral, Florida, that passing the SAVE Act through the Senate is his number one priority heading into the midterm elections. That was from the Hill. Here's Senator Thune at today's news conference.
Leader Thune, do you run a risk of being on the wrong side of President Trump in your resistance to do this talking filibuster, tying the Senate in knots for weeks?
We don't have the votes either to proceed, get on a talking filibuster, nor to sustain one if we got on it. But that is just a function of math. And there isn't anything I can do about that. I mean, I understand the President's got a passion to see this issue addressed, as we all do.
Does he understand that, though?
Well, we've conveyed that to him, but we will continue to make that argument, because I think it's important that everybody understand that this really is about the votes. It's about the math. And I'm for better or worse, I'm the one who has to be the clear-eyed realist about what we can achieve here. And so we'll continue to convey that. And I think that we're going to have the fight on the floor. We're going to vote on this. We're going to put it up, and we'll give the Democrats the opportunity to cast their vote on whether or not they think non-citizens ought to vote in American elections. And so that debate will happen. But like I said, I can guarantee the debate. I can guarantee a vote. I just can't guarantee an outcome.
When can we expect? President Trump told me yesterday that it would take Democratic votes to pass the Save America Act. Do you think the MAGA base has an unrealistic expectation of passing that legislation without Democrat support?
I think there are a lot of optimistic views about what Democrats may or may not do. We all know, because we deal with them every day, that the Democrats are not all of a sudden going to decide that this is something they want to be for. So yeah, again, I mean, I think you have a lot of optimists out there, and I appreciate that, and a lot of passion and energy behind getting an outcome here. But getting an outcome would require Democrat votes, and you know, we'll give them a chance. Like I said, they'll have that opportunity to vote one way or the other on this. But I would be very, very surprised.
Does it make it more difficult that the president keeps adding pieces of policy to this legislation? Would it be better if he just had a straight up or down vote on photo ID or citizenship, for instance?
We certainly want to vote on the issues that came over from the House. The President has since that time added some additional components to his request, which we will figure out a way to get votes on as well. But obviously, I think the core issue with respect to the Save America Act is ensuring that non-citizens aren't voting in American elections, that only citizens are voting in our elections, and that they have to be citizens to register to vote, and they have to be citizens to vote.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, at a news conference in the Capitol building. President Trump has said he wants to package the voter ID requirement, the SAVE Act, with a ban on mail-in ballots, with some exceptions, and banning transgender women and girls sports, and banning some gender-affirming medical care for trans youth. The Senate Minority Leader Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, spoke on the Senate floor today about the SAVE Act.
According to the Conservative Heritage Foundation, and you can look this up online, from 2003 to 2023, 20 years, do you know how many non-American citizens they caught voting in 20 years? 24. 24 people not voting, who are ineligible for voting in 20-year period of time. 20 years, 24 cases. The Save America Act would upend the past 2 decades of successfully secure elections with untested, dangerous limitations on voter registration. Here's how it goes. You want to buy an airline ticket and they ask you for identification? You pull out your driver's license if you have one. Simple. So why shouldn't we ask the same of voters? Well, there are a couple elements you should know. The Save America Act does not allow you to use your driver's license as identification. It doesn't allow you, even if you have a real ID, which you're supposed to have in your driver's license. So the most common form of identification for Americans is ineligible under this new law. You have to prove where you were born. They will accept a couple things, 3 things they've accepted. One is a passport. Do you have one? Half of Americans don't have a passport. They don't own one. I do, but half of Americans don't. What would it cost for you to make sure you have a passport by the next election in November? $165 fee. That's one of the ways that you can prove you're actually an American, but it's not the only one. There's another one, your birth certificate. Seen it lately? Do you have it in your home? Do you know where to find it? And if you have a birth certificate which says your maiden name is a woman and doesn't say your married name, it doesn't work. It's ineligible. So this notion of proving you're an American citizen turns out to be a lot more complicated when you actually read the proposal which the president is insisting on. Suddenly providing your driver's license, even if real ID compliant, will no longer be enough to register to vote. Nor would military IDs be sufficient for service members. Men and women serving actively in the military, sworn to uphold the Constitution. When they go to vote, shows their military ID, and they're told by the election official, wherever it is, sorry, that doesn't qualify. We need a passport or we need a birth certificate. Under this legislation, election officials would accept a limited number of documents, and this could prevent millions of Americans from being eligible to vote in November. Why would the President of the United States be pushing so hard for a bill which will make it more difficult to vote? Because he's worried as hell about the outcomes of this election. He thinks he's going to lose.
Senate Minority Whip Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, on the Senate floor. The Hill is reporting that the Democratic National Committee sued the Trump administration on Tuesday, alleging that several agencies failed to adequately respond to Freedom of Information Act requests pertaining to any plans to deploy federal agents at election sites. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, writes CBS News, unveiled a plan Tuesday that he says would centralize and streamline the way the state delivers human services, including Medicaid. His plan updates a decades-old system that relies on individual counties and managed care organizations to administer the aid. Under the proposal, the state would determine eligibility for Medicaid and manage claims processing, financial transactions, and provider services. The proposal is part of an effort to rein in fraud at the Department of Human Services and comes as the federal government is withholding $259 million in Medicaid funding until the state lays out a plan to combat it. That article from CBS News. Governor Walz held a news conference today in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Today, we're announcing a bold effort to transform how Minnesota delivers human services. Commissioner Gandhi will get into a little bit of the details, but here's kind of the top line. Proposing modernizing a proposal on how Medicaid is administered. I think we've gotten it recently, and there's been some good stories written by all of you that the managed care organizations manage a whole lot of that information. Strengthening oversight of enrollment in these programs by centralizing eligibility decisions and funding a comprehensive study to examine the role of state, counties, and tribal nations in the delivery of these to provide more transparency and effectiveness. Again, Minnesota is one of only a handful of states that still operates a county-administered human service model. Counties and tribal nations are essential partners doing the work, but the system is growing too complex for necessary oversight. Now, I want to be clear. This is not putting blame on counties or managed care organizations. It's just stating a reality. As the system over the decades has become more complex and the systems have grown out, it has been difficult, and especially for the counties, to be able to administer those correctly. And so it comes down to it. I would tell you it is both the complexity of it, and you've seen the other pieces of this, outdated technology. The Maxis system is grossly outdated. It provides immense hours of frustration for really talented people trying to do the work, and there's ample opportunities in just an antiquated system that errors can be produced in that work. So, proposal's bold. It's a starting point for reimagining how we deliver human services. We look forward to partnering with the experts, both inside the agencies and the legislative leaders. I have spent a lot of time with other states looking at what they did. I come back again to Connecticut as one that has fully gone to that centralized model more than any other, and they get rave reviews for the work they did. So I think in combination of addressing where people will continue to try and commit crimes, which they've done here, the ability to not just close the doors, or as some people want to get rid of programs, but to remodernize the delivery system, because the ultimate goal here is to get the resources to the people who need it to improve the quality of life, improve Minnesota.
Governor Tim Walz, Democrat of Minnesota, at a news conference today in St. Paul, Minnesota. CNBC reported last week that President Donald Trump has thrown his support behind crypto firms in their high-stakes battle with U.S. banks over whether they can offer interest-like returns on stablecoins. Trump, in a social media post, ratcheted up pressure on banks to relent on the stablecoin yield issue. That's the key point of contention holding up passage in Congress of the Clarity Act, which is a companion bill to the Genius Act approved last year, setting up a framework for regulated stablecoins. That was the CNBC article. One of the key negotiators on this issue, Senator Angela Alsobrooks, Democrat from Maryland, spoke about it at today's American Bankers Association Summit in Washington.
We always knew that we were going to have to revisit the issue around interest and yield because we dealt with paying interest for those who were issuers but not the exchange. So we knew that this issue was one that we were going to have to take up again.
Because it's payment stablecoin.
Yes.
We want to keep the payment in stablecoin. And so you ensured that in the Genius Act, that it was no interest and yield for store of value.
Exactly. Right? What we have led on, and this is now a part of market structure, is the belief that rewards and interest, we agree in some occasions on activity, that we should be allowed to pay interest and yield that cryptocurrencies can, but it would be really important that on a stable balance that we do not allow the payment on a stable balance that would cause deposit flight, that we would be able to protect, And there was, I have to tell you, at the market structure table, there was a discussion that first said, well, we resolved that in Genius, which is not true. We always said that we would only deal with issuers but not with the exchanges. Then there were some who said there won't be any, deposit flight. And then there was the admission, and I'm sorry to use the word, but a colleague who said there's going to be a ton of deposit flight. And so I have worked with Senator Tillis to make sure that this absolutely, positively cannot happen.
Can we make that clip go viral, what you just said?
But we wanted to make sure that we were, someone said if it quacks like a duck and looks like a duck, it is a duck. And so making sure that we are not allowing bank-like products without bank-like protections. This is what we know is really important.
Senator Angela Alsobrooks, Democrat from Maryland, at the American Bankers Association conference in Washington, D.C. Back to the CNBC article. Executives from J.P. Morgan and Bank of America, the two largest American lenders by assets, have cited a Treasury study that indicated that banks could lose up to $6.6 trillion in deposits if stablecoins offered a yield. That could destabilize some banks, especially smaller ones, and remove a source of funding for loans to businesses across the country. Finally, on Washington Today, some insight, perhaps, about whether President Donald Trump will propose another round of tax cuts in his upcoming budget for fiscal year 2027. Assistant Treasury Secretary for Tax Policy Kenneth Keys was at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce summit in Washington.
Rumors are that we expect the president's budget here in a matter of days, if not weeks. Anything you want to share about whether we should block time to spend time reviewing new revenue proposals?
No. So I know people have asked about the Green Book. For those of you who don't know, in the past, some Treasury departments, in connection with the release of the president's budget, have done what's referred to as a Green Book, which is a more detailed description of those tax provisions. There was no Green Book done last year, in part because the Treasury Department was truly overwhelmed providing technical assistance to the Hill on the president's tax bill that was enacted July 4th. So putting effort into a Green Book really wasn't where we wanted to focus our attention. I mean, I wasn't there yet, but it wasn't where the Treasury tax staff wanted to focus their attention. We wanted to focus our attention on helping the Hill, and we provided an enormous amount of technical assistance on that piece of legislation. I think it turned out as a better piece of legislation as a result. In terms of whether this year there will be a Green Book, it's in part to it's significantly impacted by whether or not the administration is going to propose new tax proposals. I think right now the administration feels very comfortable with the bill that was enacted by the president on July 4th. And so I think our focus is going to be on continuing to implement that bill. So I'm not sure there's going to be a need for a Green Book.
Let the current policy get implemented,
Yeah,
breathe a little bit,
right.
Figure out kind of where we are. Yeah.
Discussion with the Assistant Treasury Secretary for Tax Policy, Kenneth Keys, at today's program hosted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word. We'll send you the latest happening in Washington by email every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.